The evenings had started to feel longer lately, like the walls of the house stretched just a little further every time Lena sat down alone at the dinner table. Eric used to come home by 7, sometimes earlier, kissing her neck from behind while she stirred something on the stove. Now, most nights came with a text around 8 o'clock, working late. Don't wait up. She didn't. She stopped waiting months ago. She stirred the pasta absent-mindedly that evening, eyes drifting to the window overlooking the front yard. Across the driveway stood the modest brick house where David had moved in about 3 months ago. She hadn't thought much of him at first. Quiet, respectful, never intrusive. But lately, she caught herself noticing things. The way his shirts hugged his back when he worked on his yard. How he never said much, but always gave her that soft nod when they crossed paths. It wasn't flirting, at least not openly. But there was something unspoken. Maybe it was just her projecting, lonely and starved for attention. The pasta overcooked slightly. She let it. She plated it neatly anyway, set Eric's portion aside, and sat down in silence. The clink of the fork against the plate echoed more than it should have in a house this size. After dinner, she scrolled through old photos on her phone. Pictures from vacations with Eric. Smiles that now felt like distant memories. His eyes used to light up around her. Now they just scanned her, like she was a to-do list. A soft thud outside pulled her attention back. She stood, moved to the window again. David was outside, fiddling with something under his porch light. It was flickering. He glanced toward her house, probably feeling her eyes. Lena stepped back quickly, embarrassed. But not enough to walk away. She watched from the shadow of the curtain. David reached up to the light fixture, stretching, shirt lifting just enough to expose the hard lines of his waist. Rain was starting to fall, just a drizzle, but he kept working. By the time he gave up, the light was dead, and his shirt was damp against his chest. She watched him disappear back inside. She should have stopped staring. Earlier that week, she had been struggling to carry groceries up the driveway. One of the bags had ripped open near the curb. Without hesitation, David appeared. He crouched down, helped her gather the rolling apples and oranges, and carried 2 of the heavier bags to her door. He hadn't lingered. Just smiled and said, "Don't worry, I got it." That was the first time she looked at his hands and wondered how they might feel on her lower back. Now, she found herself reliving that exact moment more than she wanted to admit. The rain started picking up, a gentle rhythm tapping on the windows. She changed into pajamas, soft cotton shorts and a tank top, and curled into the corner of the couch with a throw blanket and a book she had already read twice. Eric's absence was now background noise, like the hum of the fridge. Familiar. Permanent. Her phone buzzed. A one-word message. "Sorry." That was all he sent. No explanation. No warmth. Just cold acknowledgement of his absence. She didn't reply. Sometime around 10:30, the power flickered. Once. Twice. Then went dark. She sighed, lighting a small candle on the end table. It threw soft, golden light across the living room. The kind of light that made silence feel heavier. She thought about texting Eric, telling him the power was out. But what would he say? "That sucks. Call the landlord." He wouldn't offer to come home. He never did anymore. She leaned back and closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the rain turn steady and hard. Then, a knock. Not loud. Not urgent. Just unexpected. She pulled the blanket off and padded quietly to the door, heart thudding without reason. She peeked through the peephole. It was David. She hesitated. Her hand gripped the doorknob like it had a choice. After a second that felt like a minute, she opened it slowly. He stood there soaked, a flashlight in one hand. His shirt clung to him, rain dripping from his hair. He looked up, slightly sheepish but not nervous. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Sorry to bother you this late. My power's out. I think something blew. You mind if I borrow a flashlight?" Her voice caught in her throat for a second. She nodded, then stepped aside. "Yeah, of course. Come in, I'll grab one." He stepped inside. The door closed behind him. His shoes squeaked softly on the mat. Lena moved to the hallway cabinet, pulling out a spare flashlight, trying not to think about how the candlelight danced on his damp skin. When she turned to hand it to him, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away immediately. "Thanks," he said, eyes meeting hers. Something lingered in the air between them, something heavy and warm and dangerous. "No problem," she replied, barely above a whisper. He didn't move to leave. And she didn't ask him to. David stood there holding the flashlight, but neither of them moved. The sound of the rain outside had dulled to a steady whisper, but inside the room, silence pressed between them like something physical. Lena's fingers still tingled from where they had brushed his. She should have pulled away faster. She should say something now. But nothing came out. "You sure you're okay?" David asked quietly, eyes studying her face. She nodded, then looked away, hugging the blanket around her. "Yeah, just, long day." He tilted his head slightly, then looked toward the candle on the side table. "It's nice in here. Cozy." Lena gave a small smile. "Only because the power's out. And I had a candle." David smiled too. It was a soft smile, like he knew more than he said. "Most people don't have this kind of calm when the lights go out." She shrugged. "Maybe I've gotten used to being in the dark." The words escaped before she thought them through. Her cheeks flushed as she turned away, pretending to fix the edge of the blanket draped over the couch. David didn't comment. He just stepped further into the living room, careful not to track water onto the rug. "Do you want a towel or something?" she offered, finally breaking the awkward rhythm. He nodded. "That would be nice, actually. Sorry, I didn't mean to show up like this." "It's fine," she said quickly, already heading down the hall to the linen closet. "Really? You're not bothering me." She returned with a fresh towel, handing it to him. He ran it across his hair and over his neck, then slowly down his arms. Lena tried not to watch, but she failed. Her eyes followed every movement, every flex of his forearm as he squeezed water from his shirt. He noticed. She could tell by the way his mouth curved just slightly at one corner. She forced her gaze upward. "I made tea earlier. You want some?" "I'd love some." She nodded and walked into the kitchen. David followed but stopped at the edge of the room, leaning on the counter while she moved around, her hands a little shakier than usual. She tried to stay casual, but she could feel his presence behind her like heat against her skin. The kettle was still warm, so she poured into 2 mugs and handed him one. He took a sip, watching her. "Thanks. You always this nice to your neighbors." She laughed under her breath. "Only the ones who show up soaking wet and uninvited." "Well, good to know I meet the criteria." She looked up at him again, and their eyes locked. This time, neither of them looked away. "I don't usually do this," she said softly. "Do what?" "Let someone in. At this hour." His voice dropped a note. "Maybe tonight's just different." She swallowed. Her heart thudded harder. They stood in silence, sipping tea in flickering candlelight. It should have felt awkward, but it didn't. It felt suspended, like the rest of the world had paused. David stepped closer, just enough to close the space between them. She could feel the heat radiating off his body now, mingling with the steam of their mugs. "I've seen you out here," he murmured. "In the garden. On your porch. Always alone." She nodded. "I like the quiet." "Or maybe," he said, setting his mug down gently, "you just don't want to explain to anyone why it's so quiet." Lena's chest rose slightly, defensively. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed. "But I notice things." He stepped closer again. Her hand, still holding her mug, trembled slightly. David reached for it and gently took it from her, placing it on the counter. Then his fingers, slow and deliberate, grazed her wrist. "You're not happy," he whispered. She didn't respond. "You don't have to be polite about it. I see it." Her eyes stung suddenly, not from anger or guilt, but from being seen. "No one ever asks," she murmured. "I didn't ask," he said. "I just listened." Lena didn't realize when she started leaning in. She only felt the warmth of his breath on her cheek, the slow inhale before he kissed her. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't hungry. It was slow, like he was waiting for her to stop him. She didn't. Their lips met, soft and cautious, then deepening as she reached for him. Her hand found the back of his neck, pulling him in. His arms wrapped around her waist, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in so long. The kiss broke, barely, as he pressed his forehead against hers. Neither of them spoke. The candle flickered, casting long shadows across the walls. David moved his lips to her jawline, tracing a line to her neck, and Lena tilted her head, eyes fluttering shut. It was wrong. Every bit of this was wrong. But it didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like breath, like coming up for air after months of drowning in silence. He picked her up gently, surprising her. She gasped but didn't protest. His steps were quiet as he carried her to the couch, laying her down as though she were something fragile. She reached for him, pulled him down with her, and time disappeared. There were no words. No promises. Just the storm outside, the warmth of candlelight, and the sound of two people forgetting everything for just one night. When the lights flickered back on around 2 a.m., they were both still lying there, half covered in the blanket. David stood up first, dressing quietly, respectfully. He didn't ask her anything. He didn't need to. Before leaving, he paused at the door and looked back at her one last time. "You don't have to be alone, Lena," he said gently. Then he was gone. And she was left in the dim buzz of electric light, heart pounding, unable to tell if she had just made a mistake or finally answered herself. The light humming from the ceiling fixtures felt intrusive now, too bright after the softness of candlelight and skin. Lena sat curled into the corner of the couch, legs tucked under the throw blanket, her hair tousled, her lips still faintly swollen. The warmth of David's body had left the cushion beside her barely 10 minutes ago, but it already felt like another lifetime. Her phone was on the coffee table, untouched. No new messages from Eric. No missed calls. Just the silence that had stretched too long between them, now more unbearable than ever. She glanced toward the door where David had walked out. His words still echoed, "You don't have to be alone." But wasn't that the strangest part? She wasn't alone in that moment, and yet the guilt sat heavy in her chest, a tightness she hadn't expected so soon. What they did wasn't planned. It hadn't been schemed or even hoped for. But it had happened, and now she couldn't undo the feeling it left behind. A strange cocktail of guilt, thrill, clarity, and quiet devastation. The blanket slipped slightly from her shoulder, and she pulled it tighter around herself. Her skin still remembered his touch, gentle but insistent. Her mind raced with the memory of how easily she had given in, how natural it had felt. As if her body had been waiting for someone to notice her, to ask nothing of her but to simply be with her. Outside, the storm had moved on. The rain had stopped. The air was still. Just before 5 a.m., she heard the familiar clink of Eric's key in the front door. Her heart jumped, not with excitement, but with alarm. She sat up straighter, brushed her hair back, wiped at her lips even though she wasn't sure why. He stepped inside quietly, dropping his bag beside the door and exhaling loudly. His face looked worn, tired. He barely looked at her as he mumbled, "Morning," while toeing off his shoes. Lena nodded. "You're back early." He grunted something that might have been a yes, already heading toward the bedroom. She stood slowly and followed him. "Did you eat?" He waved a hand. "Grabbed something on the way." In the hallway, he turned and looked at her for a moment. "Lights are back on, I see." "Yeah," she replied softly. "About 2 hours ago." "That storm was nasty. I got caught in it halfway home." She nodded again. They stared at each other for a brief second longer before he turned and disappeared into the bedroom, closing the door behind him without another word. And just like that, the moment was gone. No questions. No hugs. No trace that he had noticed anything had changed. Lena stood in the hallway a little longer than necessary, then returned to the living room. Her eyes scanned the room as if it might hold evidence of what had happened. The blanket. The cups. The scent. Her heart raced as she grabbed the mugs, rinsed them out, folded the blanket, wiped the spot on the counter where David had leaned. There. Clean. Quiet. Normal. And yet, she felt everything but. By noon, Eric was gone again. Meetings. Clients. Whatever excuse came next. She didn't ask. She never did. That was their rhythm now, polite avoidance masquerading as stability. Lena found herself standing in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. There were no signs. No lipstick out of place. No tousled hair left to betray her. But something in her eyes had shifted. Like she had stepped outside of herself and couldn't quite return. Later that day, she went outside to water the front garden. The soil was already damp from the night storm, but it gave her something to do. A reason to be outside. As she leaned over the rose bushes, she felt the unmistakable weight of a gaze. She looked up slowly. David stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching her. Not in a bold or possessive way. Just present. Their eyes met. And in that moment, everything was understood. He didn't wave. She didn't smile. There was no nod, no subtle gesture. Just a look. The kind of look you carry with you for weeks. She turned away first, kneeling to pull a weed that didn't need pulling. The hours passed. The world resumed. But she didn't. That night, she lay next to Eric in bed. His back was to her, his breaths deep and rhythmic. She stared at the ceiling, eyes wide in the dark. Guilt had a strange shape. It didn't always come with regret. Sometimes, it came with clarity. With the knowing that your life had tilted slightly off-center and could never quite go back. Her fingers curled against the sheet, clutching fabric she didn't want to feel. David hadn't said anything more than she needed. He hadn't promised a future or asked for an explanation. He didn't need to. That night had spoken for itself. It hadn't been love. It hadn't even been revenge. It was loneliness answering its own echo. And now, Lena would carry that echo quietly, in the spaces Eric never stepped into. In the silences she had once filled with hope. In the glances she and David might exchange from across the lawn. Never again as strangers, never truly as anything else. Some lines weren't crossed with fireworks or fury. Some lines were crossed in whispers. And no one hears them break, except the one who walks away still listening.